What's up? It's TF. We're back here with the Chipley J12, which is clearly preparing us for the zombie apocalypse here. You know, that's all they want is brains, and it gets old. It gets old. So anyway, we're here with the J12, and we're taking a look at it. I want to show you just some down and dirty stuff. Let's talk about a little bit of history and show about how this marker is a very different marker from what you've seen offered by Chipley and frankly a lot of other markers on the industry out in the industry. It's a very different thing, and so a lot of other people are sort of already comparing it to previous instantiations of the Chipley line or even the sniper gun platform. And I think you sort of have to take a step back and look at this as a very different marker. It's doing some very different things than what you're sort of used to. And I think comparisons to the other sniper platforms are going to be mostly apples to oranges when you do this. So let's go over some of the history here, and I'll show you sort of what I mean by how it's different. If you take a look at the sniper platform, and I'm using a Chipley J12 just as an example of that, you can see how different this marker is. The regulator piece, you know, you're looking at a massive difference in length there. There is no back block. There is no external auto trigger arm. The trigger is not Delrin. The trigger is very different when we get inside it. I'll show you a little bit about that later. The hammer is different. There's no cocking rod. The bolt is not linked to the hammer anymore, and some other changes that make it very, very different all the way around. I know I keep on using that word, but I really want to emphasize that in this video, that this marker should be seen as its own sort of beast, and it shouldn't be really seen in the sniper line, or else I think you're going to be sort of looking for and listening for differences in when you're tuning this and teching it that you really can't do. You really shouldn't do. I think it's going to make a different sound. I think it's going to feel different, and it's going to do different things that some people will love and some people won't necessarily love. Anyway, back block gone. You know, it's there. It's there, and definitely rides. You know, pulls the bolt back and forth. But its job is, first of all, you know, it's not a full length gun. It's what I suppose you would call a half block, but it's not even really that anymore. It's hard to even call that a half block anymore, because that's not what it does anymore. This used to pump the gun, allowing the ball to chamber, and pull the connected through the back block, pull the hammer back. And then if you looked at the half block, you know, quarter block, that sort of design, that was changed with this design through this pin that goes here that facilitated this slot to be cut and a hammer to be altered to pump the marker. That's gone. Take a look at the top of the J12 marker. First of all, that's how easy that the bolt removes. Move this to the side. It's a closed design now. There is no opening anymore that you saw on the T2 and you saw on the other half blocks out there, even the 6.5 and other instantiations, to let dirt in anymore. And so that's very different. If you look at the ASA, first of all, we can't really call it an ASA. ASA stood for Air Source Adapter. And when Bud first made this, you know, this was this huge block that was attached on to the front of this to take these threads. And these threads only exist because these were what were on CO2 bottles of the day. And those CO2 bottles were not made for the paintball industry. They were existing on the market now. So this air source adapter allowed you to put a regulator on here, whatever air source you were using, to power the marker. And back in the day, it was a 3-ounce tank or a 7-ounce tank or a 9-ounce tank or whatever you hung from the front, or a 12 gram. Now it's usually high pressure air, and we still use those threads on high pressure air, but we shouldn't. There's no reason, or not that we shouldn't. There's no reason to do so. The only reason we do it is because that's the way it was set up back in the day. So if you look at these threads that screw into this gun right here, what you're going to see is there's no need for this part of the regulator. So, and we'll show you how they did this, but this regulator now is almost internally identical. There's a lot of different parts, but what it does is very, very similar. In working fashion, it's internally identical to this, but you can take all this volume out of, by one, taking these threads off, and two, changing up how Chipley did some things inside. Now, that's easy to say and hard to engineer. Pretty much amazing once you get into it and break it down. The next thing is, again, the back block connected the bolt to the hammer, and the hammer then pumped back and forth inside the marker, and we're very much used to sort of what that looked like in there, right? There's a hammer of a 6.5, or excuse me, of a 6. Here is one from a T2 or a 6.5, whatever you're getting that out of. And so that grabbed this lug here. The sear grabbed this lug, and that's how it recocked. You're not going to see that inside of the J12. You have no lug anymore on a J12. The trigger is very different. This is a Delrin trigger. This is now an aluminum 2-stage trigger that has 2 bearings. You'll see this here. That's not a guide rod. That actually is running internally in the marker and pushing back on the hammer. This back block connected and pulled back on the hammer. Now you have a rod that goes inside and pushes back on the hammer. So again, they look similar. You can see where one came from the other. And if I had an old garage, sniper sitting here, I suppose we could go through many of these instantiations. You go, oh wow, you can see how this has progressed. But once you step into this thing, it really is different. Yes, it's inspired by, but a lot of differences went into this marker to make this possible. So let's start going through some of those differences right now and show you. Now, if you're used to taking apart a sniper marker, and one thing that you're used to is a lot of tools. One thing that Chipley didn't do a very good job of in their early days, especially when you had a hold of a SS25 or a Series 5, you had a boatload of tools to take apart this marker. Okay, you had to have a lot of Allen keys. You had to have a special tool to take apart the valve. And if you look at my video series from all the other markers, you can see how often I'm changing tools. And it quite often facilitates mistakes being made. So even during the videos, and I've been doing this for quite a long time, you'll see me go, oh, that's not the right one. You need a 5/32, or you need a 1/8, or you need a whatever. You're not going to see that on the J12. I still might make mistakes, but you're not going to see a lot of tools come out. So you notice what I did, and we're used to this. For years, Chipley has been recessing the screws in these keyholes here. Now, the cool thing that I just am really impressed with, that Chipley finally, because of, again, a design change, we finally have the same size screws in the front and in the back. And if you're a newbie, you're not know what I'm talking about, and I don't mean that negatively, but if you go back to the J2L, right, this screw was shorter than this screw because of the way the hammer traveled on the inside of here, and blah, blah, blah. And if you got them backwards, you couldn't cock the gun. And now you have the same length. You really can't make mistakes. And that's a 1/8" Allen key to take that out. Okay. Now, if you look down at the top, you can barely recognize what is going on here, right? From what you're used to seeing on regular sniper body. So if we look at your standard sniper, and we send these side by side, right, you really see a difference. Step one, this sear used to be purchased by CCM, by another manufacturer. They couldn't find many anymore. They're just not being made very much. So they are now making their own sear. That's pretty cool because that keeps quality control in-house on that product. But look at this, very small, not as small. And what the heck is this thing? Okay, well, to briefly talk about that, we have to look at how the auto triggering worked on older markers. This rod was connected to the arm, which simply turned a cam and didn't allow you to fully pull the trigger until the back block was in a position where the air passage allowed the ball to be fired. That's all that was going on there. And frankly, that's ad hoc, right? It's put on afterward. If you guys, any sniper shooters out there, you know how ugly some of those got to be. It's an ad hoc addition that was never elegant, had to be timed, had to do all these things. If we look at how the J12 does it, man, is it a different beast. Okay, so this trigger cam right here rides on this tapered pin. Okay? This tapered pin pushes the hammer back and allows it to recock. The sear will then grab this part of the bolt, and I'll show you what that bolt looks like. And I'll show you the hammer. What that hammer looks like when you come in on it. That's not a lug. It grabs here. This simply allows the marker to recock. So what is going on when you set up this auto trigger is that tapered rod almost looks like a needle valve pin, but it's not a valve, of course. That is riding on this cam. So it rides up and down, but the trigger is two-stage. That thing is breaking. So let me take this apart as we go here, and I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, so to dump these pins out, be careful, when you take this apart. Those pins can come out quickly. This one's been a little bit tighter for me later. Luckily, it doesn't need to come out for what I'm about to show you. This side pin comes out, which is what pivots this trigger on it. Now, if we look at the trigger, that is the new return spring, sear return spring, which if you are a Chipley fan, you know that that's just an old regulator pin return spring. So if we look at, and I'm grabbing my toolbox here, if we look at the trigger that exists in the older markers, there's their Delrin trigger that you're used to. One bearing, just kind of a cantilever, a lever design, right? This thing has a brass bearing down here, and then this riding bearing here, and look, it's a two-stage trigger. It's really sort of crazy. So what you see then is when you're pulling the trigger and in auto trigger mode, this is broken like this, right? Not broken, but lever is cantilevered back and is riding on this pin that is going back and forth, or not pin, but rod that's going back and forth. That is how the auto trigger is set up. So once it's set from the factory, because of how this is designed, and again, I'm no engineer, so I wouldn't know where to begin to even figure that out, but once it's set up, once rod sets the length of this rod from the factory, it's set. You can change the back block, turning that in and out, but all that's going to do is change where the bolt sits when you fire it. It really doesn't matter anymore. In the old school way of doing this, right? How many videos have you seen where you said 1/8 inch distance, blah, 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 blah. When I fire this one, it is 1/8 inch difference, but you might see a little difference back and forth. The reality is, with this oval bolt hole, it's not as important to have this timed. It comes timed from the factory. And so once it's set, that's the way you leave it. It just is, because of how the trigger is redesigned. Okay. Now a few more things about the grip frame. This is the same sear, so that's the same thing. That's really not a difference there. These are different grips. This is one thing that I'm not a huge fan of just yet, and I don't know what ramifications you're going to see down the road. But 5/32 Allen keys. These are actually coming from the factory. These are aluminum grip plates, and they can be anodized to whatever color. They're in my favorite color of marker, black. I don't really have anything else in my collection. And then there's one set screw here that allows you to move, adjust, and there's 3 holes here, 3 adjustment holes. This ASA has the T design, which is Eclipse had that on theirs, and that's kind of a cool thing. Gets rid of the rail and sort of that weakness. There's a lot more meat there to work with. But no aftermarket grip fits this now. They used to use the CZ type grip on the other markers. They weren't very pretty when they had the Delrin plates on them, and they were only held in by one screw, and it frankly wasn't the most strong design. So, Rod and the boys at CCM, Bill and those guys, they decided to go to a stronger design. They hog out more material, so it does take weight off. It is billet, of course. Everything is made out of blocks of aluminum. There's nothing that is just purchased or sort of altered slightly to be put onto the gun that can fit on other markers. This is all, this is all Chipley now. That's the design, 86 degree, that's been around for quite some time. You either love it or you don't, and I'm sure they'll probably come out with a 45 degree design later on this J12 if it's a good seller. Anyway, that's a slight difference in that as well. Let me move some of this stuff aside and sort of keep going here. So I just want to show the major differences. So now if we look underneath here, what we've got, that doesn't even look like a cocker body anymore, you know, for what you're used to. What you're used to looking at is this. And I don't even know what you got going now. You know, it's a completely different thing. Now you do notice one similarity, which is the 5/32 valve retention screw, valve body retention screw, which is what used to be in there, and it still is in there, and it does hold the valve in, kinda, but it's not the same thing. So let's take it apart, okay? So 5/32 Allen key, this takes this out. Now, what you're doing, notice what just happened. This whole part started moving, crazy stuff's going on. That 5/32 moved, okay? Now, at this stage, what you need to do is take the bolt out, and you can always take the bolt out first, okay? And rotate this over. Now look here. That is empty. Well, not quite empty. It's got the hammer and stuff. What I'm saying is the valve is out. That O-ring that just came out will be your ball detent. Of course, it's not a ball or a detent. It's a wire. It's a O-ring. But I'll show you how that works later. Let's go to here. This is your valve and regulator assembly. Now, the way you're seeing this set up, how do you test the pressure? You don't. You have to have a sort of a specialty device, and don't worry about that. That's going to be taken care of with either aftermarket or CCM is going to do something like that. I've got one on the way. They're easy to manufacture if you know how to run a lathe, and so I think someone's going to fill that niche pretty quickly, and you'll have a tester. I also don't think it's not very necessary. I think once you set it, it's sort of set it and forget it. It's just the way it works on a lot for this marker. If you're a tinkerer, this is probably not going to be your kid. You know, it's not going to be your most favorite. Now what I do, I slightly spread apart these two things to allow that, I guess we'll call it a back block to rotate off. Now the pump comes off, okay? And it has a return spring. That return spring is your normal return spring, but look how it's been clipped. Rod has to sort of set those up from the factory currently. So keep that, make sure that doesn't get lost. And now you can see fully how different that really is. This rod here, which pushes back on the hammer, you can see how tapered that is, right? It fits, and I'll show you how that fits in the hammer later. So now you've got this valve body slash sleeve slash thingamabob, and I'm going to come up with better names when I build the manual for it, but you've got a very different thing. In fact, let's use a 3/16 and take off this front guide rod, okay? That will show us even more how different this is. Now, this front guide rod had to be bored out internally and banjoed to allow this to run differently. So again, you're seeing another difference. It's bored out internally to have a little bit more air passage that's been regulated air to be held, and then it's been banjoed because there is one air transfer from the regulator that comes up and into here, okay? Let's set the regulator aside for a second and look. What is that? If you're a sniper cocker platform person, that is nothing you're used to seeing. This sleeve holds the valve pin, and if you look here, this will start to become a little bit more familiar if you're a cocker sniper user. That is a valve body, and they didn't have to do this. They did it because in case you ever wanted to throw in a different valve body and valve pin, I don't know why you would. Shipley's always been very good with their stuff. It's modular, it's really cool. So what you've got is this design right here, and once this is locked in place, once this brass body is locked into place, there is just no reason to take it out. So you're not, yes, you have to use a valve nut removal, but you know, that's the O-ring that leaks, and if it were ever to leak, this would be years down the road. Once it's set, it's in there. And this just pretty much acts as a sleeve then at that point. Now, again, pay attention to the difference, and let me grab this body. This doesn't exist in here. This is just an empty chamber. You can watch the other videos to see how it works. It's a very different beast. There's a lot of changes in metal. So the sound signature, we're already hearing people talk about, man, it just sounds a little bit different. Look at the return spring here on this poppet, this valve. It's different. It's very, very springy, spongy, light. So it's just a different marker all the way around in terms of how it's built and what it's going to sound like. Don't think it's going to sound like your mama's old sniper. You know? So anyway, that sleeve then sits inside the gun, and it's indexed. If you notice, it's indexed. It's got two flats that allow you to put it back together correctly. And the only thing that you have to make sure is that the hole is up. You know, this is you're not going to get any air to travel through the gun. So they said they might change that down the road. So you can put it in backwards if you try hard, but don't try that hard. Just put the dang hole up and you're done. You know, but that's that. That's that way. Now, once that valve is out, and you see how different that is, we can then check out the differences in the regulator. Okay. Now the regulator body then separates just like the old ones did. It just comes in half. Okay. And you don't have to loosen up the adjustment screw to do that. It just comes in half. But you'll see how different this is. What is that thing? Now this is all pretty much the same. Okay. They hogged that out to give good airflow and have good, again, more air being held. This is a very light piece. The air transfers in one hole, goes up into the banjo bolt. Some of it is, or not banjo bolt, excuse me, banjo pump rod, guide rod. It's held, air is held in there. It's held some in here. It's held some in the sleeve. And then when you fire, you've got a big chamber of air that can be used that's been regulated. Now, what they sort of did is they sort of flipped the idea of how a regulator works. The old torpedo, Bob Long torpedo style that you pretty much saw. This is what you've got. Same spring. Same top hat looking dude, that just allows you to adjust it. But what is this thing? Well, okay, what you need to know, in the bottom here, and you can't see it, I would have to have really good light, there's an O-ring in the wall of this. So what they did, instead of having the piston sit on top of here and float up and down, and we all know what that did, it allowed the regulator body to become scored over time. They made this piece, which is stainless, it fits over top of the spring. So now it's not a big piece that sits on top of the spring like this. It sits this way, right? Taking away all that room. There's no ASA threads here, taking away all that room, right? And so when the air comes in, the pressure pushes down on this piston, right? That's dimpled to ride on that pin here. Air comes in here, pushes this piston down until this poppet closes. Boop. Once it closes at whatever pressure you've got it set at, it is now regulated at that pressure, right? And you now have regulated air into the marker. And so it allows that design, that flipped piston, allows a tiny, tiny little dude. And let me put these side by side. You know, that's on the marker like this. So you see how much you're losing. It's like 2 inches. Pretty darn cool. So that's very different. Now, let's take out the hammer. This has been confusing for some online that have, you know, some of the first batches, but what you need is a 3/32, and I think I've got that. No, of course I'm going to make that mistake. You got a 3/32. Now, if you're going to adjust the velocity, you use a 1/8. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But to go through and loosen up the grub screw that is keeping this hammer in, turn it 3 or 4 times, you go through it with a 3/32, and it goes through the middle of that. What it essentially is the IVG. Now, this is a handy dandy trick from Rod. Use your bolt, push your hammer back, and you'll see, I don't know how well you can see that, I hope you can see it well. You'll see how this little wing is going to sort of come out. You need a pair of needle nose pliers. That's the only other tool you're going to need besides some Allen keys, and that comes right out. Now once that comes out, get your bolt down. Now you got an empty tube. I was being a little bit premature before. That's it, right? So let's look at the hammers now side by side. Look at this, and I know I'm starting to get into, you know, kind of excited, but you can see how different these things are. First of all, look at the size difference, right? I mean, you're seeing just massive differences all the way around. There's no lug. There's nothing. There's no IVG in here anymore. The IVG, internal velocity governor, is in the hammer. 1/8, and it's reverse threaded. So you're used to turning it, ready, tighty, turns it in and turns your pressure up is what you're used to. It still does that, but as you go ready, tighty, it's reverse threaded. So it's putting pressure on the spring backwards, right? It's compressing the spring from the hammer, not from the back end. So that is reverse threaded. If you ever do take this out, and it's very easy to take out, it's no big deal, about 4 turns in from stock. It's ready to not tighty anymore, ready loosey. So just know that. And then again, inside here is a little grub screw. If you do loosen that up too much, you have to take the IVG out and you put it back in. It's no problem, but loosen that about 4 turns. So you're seeing how different that is. Now, I talked about a ball detent before, and of course it's not a ball. It's an O-ring. Where that sits, and this is designed to allow you to get access to it. Where that sits is inside this bottom tube, held in by that sleeve. This O-ring sits in a little groove in there. Really cool, because these O-rings are dirt cheap, and they'll be around forever. They're not Intimidator or Spider or some special design. They're just off-the-shelf hardware 90 Buna O-rings you can find at pretty much any Home Depot or wherever you're looking. You drop that in there, and it goes into the, let's see if we can see that. It goes into the, there you go, body, and stops the ball from rolling forward. So really cool design that allows you to put that together. So we've got a pile of pieces here, and I've gone probably over what I should have gone over, but I just wanted to show you guys the differences that are basically there for the J12. We're going to be doing more, and of course we're going to do a full breakdown video and things too, so keep out for that. But I wanted to take it apart, your basic take apart, and show you. So it's just reverse to put that all back together, but you can now use your regular lube on hammers, no more running it dry. That can run with lube on it. It came from the factory with lube on it. I would run this dry, but you can run whatever you want to run. This is a closed system. Unless it comes through that hole or you ram it down the feed neck, dirt's not getting in there. And so it's a really closed system. You don't have to adjust the auto trigger. It's set from the factory. You really don't have to adjust the pressure on the regulator once it's set, because it's set from the factory as well. And so once you have that set, you adjust the IVG and you go. So for guys that are coming into the sport late and aren't used to snipers and stuff, I think this is going to be right up their alley. It's going to allow them to really jump in and not have a problem with a learning curve trying to understand what needs to go on to run a sniper-based marker. Now, the reason I'm putting this back together is because when you do adjust the pressure on this, what you'll do is instead of this guide rod being here, you'll put a plug in here that will be manufactured, and it will have a gauge on a quick disconnect gauge, and that will allow you to set the pressure. And they're running about 270 right now from the factory or so. And we'll talk more about that in ideal settings, and all that will come down the road, but that's what that looks like there. And you can see now why it's not as easy to set up the pressure as it was with an ASA gauge like I had before. But anyway, that's the down and dirty. This is TF, and we'll go into greater depth later. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.